Hi, my name is Jenna Calloway. I am 34 years old. I served 8 years in the United States Army, 2 tours overseas, 1 honorable discharge, and I came home with a set of skills that most people hope they'll never have to use outside of a uniform. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you that because it matters for what happens later in this story. It matters for the part where most people would have fallen apart, where the grief and the rage and the disbelief would have been too loud to think through clearly. It matters because when I pulled up to my parents' house at 4:30 in the morning and I saw what I saw on that porch, I didn't fall apart. I activated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And if there's one thing this story cannot afford, it's being told out of order. Because every single layer of what happened has to be understood before the ending makes sense. Before the justice makes sense. Before you can truly feel the weight of what my parents did and what I did about it. So let me start where all the worst family stories start. Not with the explosion, with the years of quiet fuse. My name is Jenna Calloway. I'm 34 years old. I am a registered nurse, a veteran, and the single mother of the most incredible 8-year-old girl on the face of this earth. Her name is Lily. She collects frog figurines. She sleeps with a stuffed rabbit she named Captain Ears, and she laughs so hard at her own jokes that she sometimes falls off the couch. She is the reason I get out of bed every single morning. She is the reason I stayed alive on 2 different deployments when staying alive was genuinely hard to do. She is the center of my entire world. And on the night of September 14th, my parents, the people who raised me, who stood in church every Sunday, who were known by every neighbor on their street as such a lovely couple, left her on their porch in a storm and went to sleep. If you've ever dealt with a family that had one face for the public and a completely different one for the people inside it, you already know exactly the kind of people I'm talking about. And you already know where this story goes. Stay with me, because I promise you, it gets worse before it gets better. And then it gets so much better. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio. Population just under 3,000 people. The kind of town where everyone knows your family, knows your last name, knows which church you attend, and whether you've been missing lately. In a town like that, reputation is everything. And my parents, Gerald and Patricia Holt, had a reputation that was, by every external measure, immaculate. My father, Gerald, was an accountant. Quiet, steady, methodical. He went to work at the same firm for 31 years. He coached my little league team when I was 7. He wore the same brand of khaki pants for 2 decades and never seemed to notice or care. People described him as a good man, which in small-town Ohio is the highest possible praise, and also I've learned the thing people say when they can't think of anything more specific. My mother, Patricia, was the one everyone actually knew. She ran the women's ministry at First Grace Church for 15 years. She organized the neighborhood Christmas cookie exchange. She brought casseroles to families after surgeries, after funerals, after new babies. She was visible and warm and deeply involved in everything, and in public, she was genuinely kind. I want to say that because it matters. She wasn't a monster to strangers. She was generous with strangers. She saved the other face, the quiet, cutting, diminishing face, for us, for me specifically. I have one younger sister, Rachel. She is 3 years younger than me. She lives 8 minutes from my parents' house, and she has been my mother's favorite child since the day she was born. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I'm past the stage where it hurts to say it plainly. It's just a fact, like a weather pattern. Rachel was soft where I was sharp, obedient where I was curious, domestic where I was restless. She married young, moved close, had children on a schedule that my mother approved of, and became the life my mother had always designed in her head. I became something else. When I was 18, I enlisted. I didn't tell my parents until 2 weeks before I left for basic training because I already knew what my mother's reaction would be, and I wanted as little time as possible to live inside it. She didn't cry when I told her. She got very still, in the way she always got still when something had happened that she couldn't control. And then she said, "And I will never forget this for the rest of my life." Well, I suppose if that's what you've decided. And then she got up and started washing dishes. She didn't come to my send-off. She told my father she couldn't bear to watch, as if my leaving were something being done to her. My father came. He stood at the edge of the parking lot and watched the bus pull away, and he raised one hand when I looked back through the window. I raised mine back. That was the most emotional our goodbye ever got. I was overseas for the first time at 19 years old. I called home when I could. I wrote letters. I sent money when I had extra. I never stopped trying to stay connected because even then, even at 19, even halfway around the world, I still believed that my family loved me in a way that would eventually look the way love is supposed to look. I believed that for a long time, longer than I should have. When I came home after my first tour, my mother threw a welcome home party. Not for me, I should clarify. She didn't throw it for me, specifically. She threw it for the general occasion of a Holt child returning from service, which was something she could present at church and describe to the neighbors. I sat at my own party and listened to her tell the story of my deployment as though she had been a participant in it, and I smiled and ate the potato salad, and I told myself it was fine. It was fine. She was proud. This was just how she expressed it. But it wasn't pride. I know that now. It was optics. I met Marcus during my second tour. He was stationed at the same base, a logistics sergeant from North Carolina, with a laugh you could hear from 3 tents away, and an absolute inability to take himself seriously. We fell in love the way you fall in love in the military, fast and completely, because in an environment where tomorrow is genuinely uncertain, slow and cautious, feels like a waste of the time you have. We got married at the courthouse in Fayetteville the year we both got out. My mother attended the wedding and gave a toast that was technically lovely and contained in the third sentence the phrase, "Though of course we might have hoped for a church ceremony." She smiled when she said it. Everyone laughed. I picked up my champagne glass and I drank and I let it go. We moved to Columbus. I went to nursing school. Marcus got a job in supply chain management. And 3 years into our marriage, we had Lily. Lily Rose Calloway was born on a Tuesday morning in April during a thunderstorm, which I have always felt was either a portent or just Ohio weather, and I have chosen to believe it was just Ohio weather. She came out screaming in pink and outraged at the whole situation, and she looked at me for the first time with these enormous dark eyes, and I felt something happen inside my chest that I had no word for then and still don't have a word for now. My mother arrived on the 4th day, not the first, not the second, the 4th. She had, I was told, stayed behind because Rachel was having some difficulty with her youngest and needed support. I nodded when my father explained this, and I said, "Of course." And I held my 4-day-old daughter, and I watched my mother walk around my apartment commenting on the furniture arrangement and whether I'd had enough iron in my prenatal vitamins, and I thought, she is doing it again. She is doing the same thing she has always done, and you are going to keep letting her do it because the alternative, the confrontation, the explosion, the loss, feels too expensive. I kept letting her do it for 6 more years. Marcus and I divorced when Lily was 5. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one person's fault in a clear and satisfying way. We had grown into 2 people who were better as co-parents and friends than as spouses, and we were smart enough, finally, after some very hard conversations, to recognize that before we made each other truly miserable, the split was as clean as a split with a child ever is. We shared custody. We communicated well. Lily had 2 parents who loved her and who, crucially, both loved her more than they needed to be right. My mother's response to the divorce was everything I had expected and nothing I was fully prepared for. She didn't yell. She never yelled. She just began asking, every single time we spoke, whether Marcus and I had really thought it through completely, whether therapy had been attempted with someone truly qualified, whether I understood how hard divorce was on little ones. Every question was surgical. Every question was delivered with a look of genuine concern that was, underneath, a blade. At a family birthday dinner about a month after the papers were signed, she said, to the table, not to me specifically, just into the general air of the conversation, "It's just such a shame for the child. Like Lily was a consequence. Like my daughter was a problem to be acknowledged rather than a person to be celebrated." I looked at Lily, who was across the table eating her cake with total concentration and beautiful oblivion, and I thought, she doesn't know yet what this woman thinks of her. She doesn't know she's already been filed away as a symbol of her mother's failure. She just knows Grandma's house has good cookies and a dog named Biscuit. I decided that night to keep her in that oblivion as long as possible, to put as much of myself between my mother and my daughter as I could, to monitor every visit, every interaction, to stay vigilant. I was vigilant. Until the night I had no choice but not to be. I need to tell you something about the months leading up to September, because context is everything, and I don't want you to think this was the first sign. It wasn't. There were signs, I saw them, and I told myself stories about them, and I kept choosing to believe the stories instead of the signs. The first thing that should have been a hard stop happened about 8 months before September. I picked Lily up from a Saturday afternoon at my parents' house, and she was quieter than usual. Not sad. Lily was almost never sad, but contained, like something was sitting on her that she was trying to carry politely. When I got her home and we were sitting on the kitchen counter while I made dinner, and she was supposed to be telling me about her day, she said casually, "Grandma says I'm too loud sometimes." I kept chopping. "What do you mean too loud?" "She says my energy gives her a headache." Lily picked at a thread on her sock. "I was just excited about the frog I found in the garden. I wasn't trying to give her a headache." I set down the knife. I turned and looked at my daughter, this child who had never in her life been malicious, whose loudness was the loudness of joy, whose energy was the energy of curiosity, and I felt something cold move through me. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "Some adults get overwhelmed by big energy. It's not about you. It never was." She seemed to accept that. She went back to picking at her sock thread. But I stood there at the cutting board for a long moment after that, and I heard a voice in the back of my mind, the precise, measured military part of me, say, "That's threat behavior. Pay attention." I paid attention. 3 weeks later, I picked Lily up, and my mother mentioned, with a particular casualness that I recognized as its opposite, that Lily had been a bit sensitive lately and that she'd had to have a conversation with her about behavior. She didn't elaborate. When I asked what she meant, she said, "Oh, nothing serious. Just letting her know that guests in someone's home have certain responsibilities." Lily was 7 years old. She was a guest in her grandparents' house, and she was being spoken to about responsibilities. I asked Lily about it in the car. She said Grandma had told her that she needed to be quieter and more helpful, and that she shouldn't touch things that weren't hers, and that she was not to go into certain rooms. When I asked which rooms, Lily said the living room when the good furniture was out, and the sunroom where the shelves were. My mother had sectioned off parts of her own house from her 7-year-old granddaughter. I should have stopped the visits then. I know that now with a clarity that is almost painful, but I told myself it was boundaries, that some grandparents had different styles, that as long as Lily wasn't being hurt, navigating a difficult person was a life skill. I told myself every story except the true one, which was, this woman does not like my child, and I keep bringing my child to her anyway. September 14th was a Tuesday. The shift coordinator called at 7 in the morning. Her name is Brenda, and I genuinely like her, which made it harder to say no. And she explained that Teresa, one of the senior nurses on the evening floor, had a family emergency. Her mother had had a stroke. They needed someone to cover a double. I had done 3 singles in a row, and my body knew it, but the overtime would cover 2 months of Lily's after-school program, and I said yes. I worked the phone for an hour after that trying to find childcare. Dana, my regular sitter, a 20-year-old education major named Dana, who Lily adored, had texted me at 6 that morning with food poisoning. I called her backup, a woman I had used twice before named Carol, and got her voicemail. I called 2 friends who I would have trusted implicitly with Lily. One was at a wedding in Michigan. The other didn't answer and texted me an hour later saying she was dealing with her own emergency. My mother was always the last resort, not because I didn't love her, but because every time I used that resort, I spent the following days processing what had happened and reassuring Lily that nothing about it was her fault. I called her at 8:15 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already awake and had probably already been to the 7 o'clock prayer service. "Mom," I said, "I have a situation. I need someone for Lily tonight, and I'm completely out of options. I know it's short notice, and I know you've done this a lot lately, and I hate to ask again." "Jenna." She cut me off in that patient, measured way she had. Bring her over, but she needs to be settled before my Bible study group at 7. I can't have her running around during that. I'll drop her off at 4. She'll be asleep long before 7. And pick her up first thing in the morning. I have my walk at 7:30. I'll be there by 6:30 at the latest, I said. Mom, thank you. Really, I mean it. She made a small sound that was neither you're welcome nor don't mention it, and then said, we'll see you at 4, and hung up. I packed Lily's bag myself while she ate breakfast. Pajamas, the little moon print cotton ones she'd been obsessed with. Socks, the thick fuzzy ones because my parents kept the house cold. Toothbrush and toothpaste in a Ziploc, a change of clothes for morning. Captain Ears, who was non-negotiable. A small bag of her favorite crackers, those thin peanut butter ones she'd eat by the sleeve if you let her. Because she got hungry after 8, and my mother's idea of a bedtime snack was half a glass of milk and whatever conviction she'd pulled from that morning's scripture. I drove her over at 3:50. I was already in my scrubs. I had coffee in the cup holder and my lanyard around my neck and my hospital bag on the back seat, and I was, in a purely functional sense, ready for the night ahead. What I was not ready for, what you are never ready for, no matter how well trained you are, was what came after. But I didn't know that yet. So I pulled up to the beige Colonial with the attached garage and the American flag on the porch, and I got out and I helped Lily out of the back seat, and I crouched down on the driveway and I held her face in my hands. You are going to be great tonight, I told her. You are going to eat your dinner and take your bath and sleep like a champion, and I will be there when you wake up. Okay? She nodded seriously, the way she nods when she's taken something in as a real commitment. Can I bring Captain Ears? Captain Ears is already in your bag. Her face broke into a grin so wide it took up half her head. She grabbed my neck in a hug that almost knocked me sideways, and then she squirmed free and ran up the front steps and knocked. She always knocked. She had been taught to knock. She was the most mannerly small person I had ever met. And my mother opened the door and said hello in her company voice, and Lily ran inside and the door closed. I stood in the driveway for one moment, just one. Then I got in my car and I drove to work. The shift was brutal in the specific way that double shifts at understaffed hospitals are brutal. Not one single dramatic thing, no code blue, no disaster scenario, just 12 hours of relentless need, one thing after another, a constantly replenished list of tasks that never got shorter no matter how fast you moved. I had 7 patients by 10 p.m. I lost count of how many vitals I took. I ate half a granola bar at 11:30, standing in the hallway next to the supply closet, and called it dinner. At 4:05 a.m., I clocked out. I texted my mother from the parking garage. Finished, heading out now. Be there around 4:30. Thank you again. I drove with the windows cracked because the cold air was the only thing keeping my eyes open. The rain had started sometime around midnight. I'd heard it against the hospital windows during a lull, and by 4 in the morning, it had become the serious kind. Not thunderstorm serious, not dangerous, but heavy and relentless, and the kind of cold that seeps rather than stings. The wipers were going fast. The radio was off because I needed quiet. I turned onto my parents' street and I saw the house. Every light was off, which was normal, which made complete sense at 4:30 in the morning. I was not alarmed by the darkness. What alarmed me was the shape. It was on the porch, small, low to the ground, pressed against the front door. My brain processed it in pieces. An object, a person, no, a child. And then my body processed it before my brain finished the sentence, and I was parking the car and opening the door, and I was on the pavement, and I was running. I took the porch steps in one stride. My daughter was curled against the front door, with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around Captain Ears so hard her knuckles had gone white. She was in her moon pajamas. She was barefoot. Her hair was soaked through and flattened against her skull, and her skin, when I touched her face, when I grabbed her hands, was cold in a way that stopped my breath. Not cool, not chilly, cold. The kind of cold that has been accumulating for a long time. Her lips had a cast to them, pale, faintly blue at the edges. She was shaking. Her whole body was shaking in the involuntary, muscular way that is the body's last argument for warmth. Lily, I grabbed her shoulders. Lily, look at me. Baby, look at me. Her eyes were open, and when she heard my voice, her face did something that I cannot describe accurately even now. It collapsed. The way a face collapses when it has been holding itself together through will alone for a very long time, and suddenly the thing it was waiting for has arrived. She made a sound, high and thin and broken, and she said, "Mama, Mama, I waited. I kept waiting for you." I picked her up. She was not a small child. She was 8. She was solid and long-limbed, but I picked her up and carried her to the car, and I did not look back at that house. I got her in the back seat. I turned the heat to maximum. I had an emergency thermal blanket in a flat packet under the passenger seat. Old military habit, the kind of thing that becomes automatic when you've been in enough situations where the thing you didn't have was the thing you needed. And I ripped it open with my teeth and wrapped it around her, and I held her face and I looked at her. "How long were you out there?" I asked. My voice was completely level. I noticed this about myself. Completely level. She didn't know. She was crying now in the exhausted, boneless way of children who have been holding it too long, and between sobs she told me that Grandma had put her outside after something broke, that it was still dark when she went out, that she had knocked and knocked on the door, that no one came, that she sat down because her legs got tired of standing, that she had tried to keep Captain Ears dry by holding him under her chin. Something broke. I tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and I said, "I'm here now. You're safe. I've got you." And I drove. I took her directly to the pediatric urgent care facility on Granger Avenue. I am a nurse. I know hypothermia. I know the signs. I know the protocol. I know what the look of a child in cold stress looks like, and I was not going to take her home and put her in a warm bath and hope for the best. I was going to get her evaluated, treated, and documented. The triage nurse took one look at us when we walked in and moved us to a room immediately. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Vasquez, young, calm, the specific kind of calm that comes from being good at something, and she did the assessment with quiet efficiency. Lily's core temperature was below normal, not dangerously so, not a life-threatening crisis, but low enough to require monitored warming, which meant heated blankets in a controlled sequence, warm broth, temperature checks every 15 minutes. Lily submitted to all of it with remarkable patience. She was still shaking when they settled her in the treatment bed, but within 30 minutes the shaking had slowed. She drank the broth. She held Captain Ears against her chest. She asked me at one point if she was going to have to go back to Grandma's, and I said, "No, baby, no, you're not." She closed her eyes and she went to sleep, and I sat in the chair beside her and I cried. Quietly, with my hand over my mouth, for approximately 4 minutes. The specific, efficient crying of a person who allows themselves exactly the time they need and then stops. Then I took out my phone and I started building my case. I called Marcus at 5:15 in the morning. He answered before the second ring. He always answers when it's about Lily. Always, without exception, no matter what time it is. And I want to say that for the record because Marcus is not the villain of this story and he deserves his credit. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. He heard it in my voice. I told him everything. The drop-off, the shift, arriving home, finding her, the urgent care, the temperature, the blanket, all of it. I told him in the sequential, unemotional way I'd been trained to report a situation, and when I finished, there was a silence on the line that went on for long enough that I said, "Marcus, you still there?" "Yeah," he said. His voice was flat, was a specific kind of flat that I recognized. The flat of someone who is feeling something enormous and compressing it into one syllable so they don't lose control of the conversation. "Are you pressing charges?" "I'm building the case first," I said. "But yes, whatever you need from me, anything, say the word." "I know," I said. "I'll call you later." Then I opened the notes app on my phone and I started writing. Time I dropped Lily off, time I left, time the shift ended, time I texted my mother, time I arrived, estimated time of Lily's exposure based on what she'd told me. I photographed her wet clothing before the nurses bagged it. I photographed the mud on her bare feet. I asked Dr. Vasquez, plainly and professionally, to document in Lily's medical record the estimated duration of cold exposure and the clinical presentation on arrival. Dr. Vasquez looked at me for a moment and then said, "Of course. And I want you to know, I'm obligated to initiate a child welfare flag on this case." Good, I said. I was going to ask you to. At 6 in the morning, I texted my mother. Lily was on your porch when I arrived at 4:30 a.m. She was in hypothermia. We are at urgent care now. Do not contact me. I will contact you when I am ready. Her response came at 6:47. I know the exact time because I screenshot it the moment it arrived. She broke my Wedgwood plate and threw a temper tantrum when I tried to correct her. I put her on the porch to calm down. I didn't realize the time had gotten away from me. I was exhausted and I fell asleep. I'm sorry she was uncomfortable, but this is being made into something much larger than what it was. I hope you'll think carefully before you react out of emotion. I read that message 3 times. I forwarded it to Marcus. I forwarded it to my own email. I saved it to a folder I labeled, very simply, evidence. Then I put my phone face down on the chair beside me, and I watched my daughter breathe for a while. She was warm now. Her color was back. She was making the small sounds she always made when she was in deep sleep. The tiny sighs and half words that used to terrify me when she was an infant because I didn't know yet that they were normal, that babies just narrate their dreams. Captain Ears was still tucked under her chin. I thought about what my mother had written. I didn't realize the time had gotten away from me. 3 hours and 22 minutes. My child was outside in 40-degree rain for 3 hours and 22 minutes, and the explanation was that time had gotten away from her. I thought about what it meant that she had gone to sleep, that she had sent an 8-year-old outside as punishment and then gone upstairs and gotten into bed, that somewhere in my mother's internal arithmetic, this had been acceptable, a proportionate response, a discipline technique that got away from her. And I thought, in the cold, clear, operational way that I had learned to think when I needed to be effective rather than emotional, about what I was going to do about it. I was not going to have a screaming confrontation on her front lawn. I was not going to call her back and say every word that was burning in my chest. I was not going to give her the explosion she could later reframe as Jenna overreacting, the drama she could present to family as proof of my instability. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be thorough. I was going to build something she could not talk her way out of, could not minimize in a church hallway, could not explain away to the neighbors and the women's ministry and every person whose good opinion she had spent her life curating. I was going to use every resource available to me, and I was going to be patient. Let me pause here for a second, because I know some of you are wondering whether I'm being too harsh, whether a grandmother accidentally falling asleep is really something worth everything that follows, whether this is a misunderstanding that got out of hand. I want you to sit with what I've told you. An 8-year-old child, pajamas, barefoot, 40 degrees, 3 hours and 22 minutes. And the explanation was, I fell asleep. If that doesn't answer your question, keep listening, because there's more. I hired a lawyer named Daniel Orr 3 days after the incident. My family attorney from the divorce referred me to him. He handled both family law and criminal matters, and when I sat across from him in his office and laid everything out, the medical records, the text message, the photographs, my written timeline, he looked at all of it and then looked at me and said, "You're very organized." I was trained to be, I said. We filed a complaint with Child Protective Services that week. The case was assigned an urgency classification based on the medical documentation. An investigator named Ms. Tran came to our home to speak with Lily. And I want to say this clearly because it matters. Ms. Tran was exceptional. She was patient and gentle, and she spoke to Lily like a person who deserved to be taken seriously. She sat on our living room floor with Lily, and she let Lily show her captain ears, and she asked her questions in a way that felt like conversation rather than interrogation. Lily told her the truth, exactly what had happened, in the order it had happened, without drama and without exaggeration. She said Grandma had told her that breaking the plate was very bad and that she needed to go outside and think about what she'd done. She said she had knocked on the door when the rain started. She said no one came. She said she had sat down on the mat because the mat was drier than the steps. She said she had counted to 104 times because that was how her teacher told her to calm down when she was upset, and she had wanted to show Grandma she was calm. When Ms. Tran left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, and I thought about my daughter counting to 100 on a cold porch in the rain, and I felt something move through me that I have no clean name for. Not just anger, deeper than anger, the specific grief of a parent who knows their child was afraid and alone and trying so hard to be good enough. Ms. Tran also visited visited my parents' home. I wasn't there, obviously, but I was told by a neighbor, a woman named Carol, who had known my parents for 20 years and who, as it turned out, was quietly horrified by what had happened, that my mother had answered the door in her church clothes, pearls, lipstick. She had apparently offered the investigator tea and spoken at some length about how dedicated she was to her grandchildren and how this had been a terrible misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by a daughter who had always struggled with conflict. Ms. Tran, from what I understand, was not moved by the pearls. The security footage came through my lawyer 2 weeks after the incident. The neighborhood had cameras at the entrance and along the main residential road, and one of those cameras had a partial angle on my parents' driveway and front porch. With the legal paperwork in order, we obtained that footage. I watched it one time. I watched a timestamp that read 10:43 p.m. show a small figure appear in the frame of the porch. I watched that small figure sit down. I watched the timestamp move 11:09, 11:30, midnight, 12:30, 1 dow. While the figure remained motionless except for the slight movement of the thermal blanket I know now was Lily pulling Captain Ears tighter. The figure did not move inside at any point. No one came to the door. At 2:05 a.m., the rain intensified. The small figure curled more tightly. At 4:27 a.m., a car pulled up. I gave the footage to my lawyer. I told him I couldn't watch it again. He said he understood. He made 6 copies. My father called me in the second week of October, not my mother. My father, separately, on his own. He called from his cell phone, which meant he was not at home. I later found out he had driven to the parking lot of the grocery store to make the call in private. He said, "Jenna, I need you to know I wasn't there when it happened. I was at the Hendersons that night. We had a poker game. I didn't know she'd put Lily outside. I didn't know any of it until the next morning." "I know, Dad," I said. "I know you weren't there. I should have been home." His voice cracked, actually cracked. I had heard my father cry maybe twice in my life. I should have been home with her. "Dad." I stopped. I breathed. "What happened is not on you, but I need you to understand. I am not letting this go. I can't. I won't. And I need you to decide where you stand." There was a long silence, and then he said, "I understand. I'm not going to ask you to let it go." Another pause. "I'm going to be seeing someone. A therapist. I made the appointment last week." I didn't say anything for a moment because I genuinely didn't know what to do with that. My father, Gerald Holt, khaki pants and quiet routines and 38 years of deferring every hard thing to my mother, had made himself a therapy appointment. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it completely. He didn't ask me to go easy on my mother. He didn't ask me to consider her feelings. He just said, "I love you, Jenna. I love that little girl." And we hung up. The CPS investigation concluded at the end of October with a formal finding of substantiated child endangerment. The report documented the duration of exposure, the medical findings, Lily's account, and my mother's own written admission via text message. That text message, I didn't realize the time had gotten away from me, was referenced specifically in the finding, substantiated. That word. I read it, and I felt something move in my chest. Not triumph exactly, not celebration. Something more like the feeling of being believed after a very long time of being told you were too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. The CPS finding became the foundation of the civil case. My lawyer filed a civil complaint in the first week of November. The defendant's attorney, hired, I later found out, on my father's credit card because my mother had insisted they fight it, reached out about a settlement within 3 weeks, which told me everything I needed to know about how well the defense thought their case would hold up in front of a judge. The civil case settled in November. The terms are sealed and I won't disclose the specific amount. What I will tell you is that it was not a small number, and that my mother's face, according to my lawyer who was in that room, was not the face of someone who believed she had done nothing wrong. But as I said earlier, the money was never the point. My mother launched her own campaign in the weeks after the CPS finding. I expected it. I had planned for it. She called family members, my Aunt Linda, my Uncle Ray, my cousin Derek, my cousin Carla, and she told them her version of events. In her version, Lily had broken a valuable and irreplaceable piece of her Wedgwood collection, true, had thrown a screaming fit when corrected. Lily's word for what happened was that she had said sorry and started crying, and had been placed on the porch for a few minutes to collect herself, after which my mother had dozed off because of her blood pressure medication. In her version, I was a vindictive, ungrateful daughter who had always weaponized conflict and was now using my own child to punish her mother for having standards. I was told this narrative by 4 separate people in November. I did not respond to any of them. What I did instead was send, in the first week of November, a single email to my Aunt Linda, my Uncle Ray, my cousin Derek, my cousin Carla, and the Hendersons, who had been my parents' closest friends for 15 years. The email contained 2 attachments: the CPS finding and Lily's medical records from urgent care. No commentary, no editorial. One line of text: I thought you deserved to have the documented facts before forming an opinion. I didn't tell my mother I was sending it. I didn't warn her. I just sent it. The responses were varied and deeply human. Aunt Linda called me crying and said she didn't know what to say. Derek texted me and said he was disgusted and that he was there for whatever I needed. Carla didn't respond at all, which told me she had sided with my mother. The Hendersons, Bill and Marcy Henderson, who had known my parents since their kids were in grade school together, sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter. It said they were horrified, that they considered Lily part of their extended family, and that they needed time to think about what this meant for their relationship with my parents. I thanked everyone who reached out. I didn't push. I didn't need to. Thanksgiving. Every year for as long as I could remember, my parents' house was the center of Thanksgiving. 30 people around pushed together tables, my mother's green bean casserole and her sweet potato pie, football on the TV in the living room, the particular noise of a big family eating and arguing and laughing all at once. My mother presided over it like a conductor. It was her favorite day of the year, the day she was most completely herself. She called me in the first week of November to discuss, quote, logistics, as though nothing had happened. As though there was no CPS finding, no civil settlement, no medical record, no 3 hours and 22 minutes. As though we were simply a normal family working out the details of a normal holiday. I let her talk for almost a full minute. She mentioned the menu. She mentioned the timing. She mentioned that she hoped I'd bring Lily because the cousins always loved seeing her. And then I said, Mom, I'm going to stop you. Lily and I won't be coming to Thanksgiving this year. I want you to know that I've already sent the CPS report and the medical records to Linda, Ray, Derek, Carla, and the Hendersons. I sent them last week. I thought they deserved to have the facts. The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever heard from my mother. You had no right, she finally said, and her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before. You had no right to do that to this family. You had no right to do what you did to my daughter, I said. We're even on the question of rights. Good luck Thursday, Mom. I hung up. Thanksgiving at my parents' house that year, according to Derek, who sent me a text that evening, had 4 people at it. My parents, Rachel and Rachel's husband, who spent most of the meal staring at the table. Derek came to Lily's and my Thanksgiving. He brought his wife, Naomi, and their 2 kids, and Naomi brought her mother's sweet potato bread, and we borrowed 2 folding tables from the neighbors and pushed them together in my kitchen, and we had more food than 9 people could eat in 3 days. At one point, Lily told a joke that made no logical sense whatsoever, and then laughed so hard at her own punchline that she snorted mashed potato through her nose, which sent the table into a chaos of laughter that probably lasted 4 minutes. It was the best Thanksgiving of my life. I want to say that clearly, the best one. Better than any of the ones at the big crowded table with the green bean casserole and the performance of family. Better because it was real and chosen, and nobody at that table had to pretend anything. In December, Aunt Donna came. Donna is my mother's younger sister, and she lives in Fort Lauderdale, and she is the opposite of my mother in almost every identifiable way. Loud where my mother is controlled, warm where my mother is measured, the kind of woman who shows up to your door in a bright orange coat that should not work and somehow completely works. She and my mother have had a complicated relationship for as long as I can remember, the kind that happens between siblings who grew up in the same broken environment and responded to it differently. My mother built walls. Donna tore hers down and has been rebuilding in different configurations ever since. Donna called me before she came. She said, I've been sitting with this since October, and I need to see you, and I need to say some things in person. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon. When I opened it, she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "I'm sorry. For all the years I saw things and didn't say enough. I'm sorry." And that was the thing that finally completely broke me open. Not the storm, not the porch, not the text message, not the CPS report. The apology from a woman who had nothing to apologize for, offered freely, without any hope of what she might get back for it. I cried in Aunt Donna's hallway for a long time, and then Lily came down the stairs in her socks and looked at us curiously, and Donna held out her arms, and Lily walked right into them, which is one of the things about Lily that will always astonish me. Her willingness to trust warmth when she sees it. Her instinct for safe people. Donna stayed for 3 days. She told me things about my mother's childhood, about their household, about their parents, about the particular shape of the damage that had been passed down and had become, in my mother, what it had become. I'm not going to share those details because they're not mine to put into the world, but I will say, understanding someone is not the same as forgiving them. And forgiving someone is not the same as letting them back in. I understand my mother better now than I ever have. She has not been alone with my daughter since September 14th. She will not be alone with my daughter again. My mother sent me a letter in February. 3 pages, handwritten, on her good cream stationery with the embossed border that she saved for formal occasions. It said many things. It said she was devastated by the distance between us. It said she had never meant for any of this to happen. It said she loved Lily and had always loved Lily and hoped that I knew that. It said she hoped we could find our way back to each other as a family for Lily's sake. What it did not say, not once in 3 pages, was, I was wrong. It did not say, what I did was inexcusable. It did not name the specific thing it was supposed to be apologizing for. It circled the wound without ever touching it. An apology that refuses to name the wrong is not an apology. It's a negotiation. It's a request for the wounded person to do the emotional work of completing the apology on the apologizer's behalf so that everyone can feel better faster. I have spent my whole life completing my mother's emotional work for her. I am done. I wrote back 1 paragraph. I said, when you're ready to say specifically what you did, not how it felt from your side or how things escalated or what you hoped, I'll be ready to hear it. Until then, I love you as my mother, and that's where we stand. She hasn't written back. I'm patient. I want to say something now that I've been building toward for this entire story. And it's not about my parents. It's about me. About the choices I made in the years before September 14th that I have had to account for honestly. The way you account for everything honestly when you're trying to actually heal rather than just survive. I saw the signs. I have told you the signs in this story, and I want you to notice that I saw them. The comment about Lily's energy giving her a headache. The rooms she wasn't allowed in. The word responsibilities applied to a 7-year-old guest in her grandparents' home. I saw all of it, and I kept driving Lily back there because the alternative, losing the relationship completely, having the confrontation, being called dramatic, felt more expensive than the cost of vigilance. I was wrong about that math. The cost of my vigilance was paid by my daughter on a porch in 40-degree rain. I'm not saying this to hurt myself. I'm saying it because I think it's the most important part of this story for anyone who is listening. How many of us are doing this right now? How many of us are handing our children over to people we already know are not safe for them because we're hoping love will win eventually, because we can't afford the fallout, because we're holding the family together with our own 2 hands, and the minute we stop it, all comes apart. Your child cannot protect themselves from the adults in their life. You are the only protection they have. The evidence is the evidence. Act on it. Lily is doing beautifully. I need you to know this because she is the whole point of everything I've just told you, and I refuse to end a story about her without telling you who she is on the other side of it. She saw a child therapist for 4 months. Dr. Park, who specialized in childhood trauma, and who Lily called, with complete accuracy, the feelings doctor. Lily went willingly every time and came home after each appointment in slightly better shape than she'd left. Dr. Park told me, near the end of their sessions, that Lily had an unusually strong sense of self for her age, and that in her clinical opinion, Lily's resilience was remarkable. I am not surprised. She has always been remarkable. She still sleeps with Captain Ears, who has now survived in her accounting 4 adventures. The storm, the hospital, the feelings doctor, and the time you washed him and he went in the dryer. She started 3rd grade this year and made a best friend named Kezia on the very first day because Kezia had a frog eraser and Lily had a frog bookmark, and they looked at each other across the table and apparently considered this a sign. She asked me once, about 6 weeks after everything, why Grandma had put her outside. I took a breath. I thought about how to say something honest without saying something destructive. And then I said, because Grandma made a very bad choice. Adults make bad choices sometimes, but it was never, ever about you. You didn't do anything wrong. She thought about this for a moment with the seriousness she brings to things that matter to her. Then she said, Grandma should have just been mad at the plate. Yes, baby, she should have. My relationship with my parents is what it is right now. And I want to be honest that what it is complicated and imperfect and not a clean ending. My father is in therapy. He calls me every couple of weeks. We talk about small things mostly. How Lily is doing, what he's been reading, whether I've had a chance to rest. We don't talk about my mother. We've reached an unspoken agreement that we talk around her rather than through her, because the through her conversations are things neither of us is ready for yet and maybe never will be. I love my father. I think he is a man who has spent 63 years being the person beside the loudest person in the room and has only now, at great cost to people he loves, started to figure out who he is when he's standing somewhere else. My mother has not reached out again since the February letter. I don't know what that means. I hold space for the possibility that she is doing work I can't see. I hold equal space for the possibility that she is waiting for me to come back to her on her terms, the way I always have. I genuinely don't know which it is, and for the first time in my life, I'm not trying to figure it out. I'm letting it be what it is and directing my energy toward the things I can actually control. My daughter, my work, my life. I said at the beginning of this that I was trained never to leave a soldier behind. That is true. It is one of the most foundational things I learned in 8 years of service, that you do not abandon your people. You go back. You don't calculate the risk and decide it's too high. You go back. Lily is not a soldier. She is 8 years old and she collects frog figurines and she snorts mashed potato when she laughs too hard. She is not equipped for battle. She is equipped for exactly what she should be equipped for at 8 years old. School and friends and Captain Ears and the particular joy of a frog eraser appearing at exactly the right moment. My job is to make sure no one ever puts her in a battle she didn't sign up for. My job is to be the assessment, the plan, and the execution. My job is to go back. I went back. I am still going back. Every single day. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. I know this was a long one. I know some parts of it were hard, but I wanted you to have the whole story, not just the dramatic moments, the years of warning signs that I minimized, the decision to build a case instead of lose my mind, the Thanksgiving with 9 people and snorted mashed potatoes, the letter I haven't received a response to yet, all of it. If any part of this reflected something in your own life, something you're sitting with, something you're trying to figure out, I want to hear from you. Please leave a comment. Tell me what this brought up. Tell me where you are in your own story, because I read every single one, and you would not believe how many of us are living in some version of this and thinking we're alone in it. You are not alone. And if you're watching this late at night, trying to figure out whether to trust what you know, trust it, the quiet knowing, the evidence. The part of you that has been flagging something for longer than you've been willing to listen to it. Trust that part. It's the most important thing you've got. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your kids. I'll be here.